Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started, because this is a conversation, it's not a presentation. And so we're thankful for all who are joining us. This is a topic lounge on the subject of small and medium, or micro, small and medium enterprises, and we'll get into exactly what those means in a few minutes. My name is Tim Ogden. I'm the managing director of the Financial Access Initiative, which is a research center based at NYU's Wagner School of Public Policy, focused on how financial services can better meet the needs and improve the lives of households around the world. Co-hosting with me today is Laura Freschi, who is our engagement director at FAI and a leader of a new project that we're going to be talking some about, and is the reason we're hosting this topic lounge today.
Hi, everyone.
This is the first time we've done this, both e-MFP virtually and a topic lounge virtually. So as you may have noticed, if you've been attending some other of the e-MFP events, this is not the StreamYard broadcast, but a Zoom meeting. So we're expecting some interaction while recognizing that we are going to we're going to have to figure out how exactly this works with the conversation. So please be patient with us as we go. But we are going to try and hear thoughts from each of you, at least to the extent that you want to share some thoughts with us. That's why we're here. The topic for today is research on small and medium enterprises. And so we're going to start. I was going to ask Laura to tell us, to share with you the impetus for this particular topic is some new research we're embarking on at FAI. And so, Laura, would you get us started by just telling us about the Small Firm Diaries?
Sure, I'd be glad to, Tim, and thanks to everyone for joining us in this topic lounge. So today we're launching the Small Firm Diaries. And the Small Firm Diaries is a research study that's going to take place in 6 countries, from Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Those countries are Colombia. In Africa, it's Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Uganda, then Indonesia and Fiji. And our goal with this study is to understand small firms and to understand the barriers to growth among small firms, what prevents them from growing, what makes them fail, and what hinders their productivity. As we do that, we want to look at especially how those barriers might differ for women-led firms. And we also want to give special attention to how financial services, formal and digital financial services might provide ways to help us overcome some of those barriers. Our approach in this project will be to listen to small firm owners and workers using the financial diaries approach. So as many of you probably know, through financial diaries, we collect high frequency data. So our researchers visit with small firms several times a month. In this case, over the course of a full year, collecting quantitative data, so cash flows in, cash flows out, and a lot of qualitative data and conversations with small firm owners to understand choices and the context behind the choices and the decisions that small firm owners are making. We've been wanting to do this project for many years. In some ways, it's a successor to Portfolios of the Poor, which was also a financial diaries study, but focusing on households. And just this year, we've been lucky to get some funders interested in supporting the project. So the project is now funded by the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Argidius Foundation, and ANDI, the Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneurs, and a research center at Australian University. Out of all of this, just to conclude this little nutshell description, is we hope from this to get really relevant country level findings in each of the 6 countries that we're working in. We want to be able to inform the design of business support services, of financial services, of new policies, and to help small firms thrive. And not just because we care about small firms, but because we want them to be able to fulfill their potential as creators of jobs and engines of poverty reduction in local economies.
Thanks, Laura. Because this is a conversation, I now want to sort of, I don't want to take the time to sort of do one by one introductions of everyone, but we are very interested in who we have here. So if you are from an organization that provides financing to small and medium enterprises or is potentially interested in doing so, could you please just speak up quickly and let us know who you are and where you are?
Hi there, everyone. My name is Vijay Kumar Gurung. I'm from Nepal and currently working with Muktinath Vikas Bank, which is a kind of a bank which focus on a majority of loans are in MSME sector itself.
Excellent. Thanks you, Vijay. Any other institutions that provide credit to SMEs or are considering providing credit to SMEs out there? Any business support services organizations who provide support to SMEs?
Hello, so I am Roberta Consiglio and I work for University of Luxembourg. I find very interesting the topic of small and medium enterprises, and especially I am interested in understanding if you are considering studying also some the impact of the measurement, assess the ESG factors in small and medium enterprises, and also why and how actually you chose the geographies that you mentioned. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Roberta, for weighing in with some questions. Laura, why don't I take that opportunity to come over to you, because part of this is what are we actually looking at? Who are we looking at? Why are we looking at those firms and where? Why don't you sort of start there, and then after Laura tells a little bit about what we're doing with the small firm diaries, I'm going to come back to sort of the rest of the group to ask about how you think about what a small firm is, and what questions, Roberta, sort of embedded in your question is you're really interested in some things about ESG and some specific geographies. And so we'd like to hear more about what other people are interested in, because we are still very much shaping this study to figure out what it is we're going to be looking at. So we definitely want to hear from you. So Laura, would you kick us off on this, on talking a little bit about what kinds of firms we're looking at and what kinds of questions we're asking?
Sure, I'd be glad to. So, we know, and that MSMEs play a huge role in economic growth and in reducing poverty. I mean, essentially, they provide jobs and goods and services for literally billions of people. And we know that, working for or even being the owner of one of these firms is not necessarily enough to escape from poverty. There's also a lot that we don't know about these firms, which is why it makes for such compelling research opportunity. Just for one, there's not a lot of agreement on what comprises a micro or a small or a medium firm. So I do want to take just 1 second to sort of lay out how we're using these terms, so that when we use the terms we use, everyone has the same sort of image of what kind of firms we're talking about here. So the micro firm is owner-run firm. 0 employees outside of the family, is probably self or microcredit funded, is most likely to be informal and run out of the home. The small firm of the small firm diaries, there is the next tier up, with 1 to up to 20 employees who are non-family members, non-immediate family members. It's also, we theorize, likely to be informal, though there may be some firms who are formalized, and expect to see some access to formal and digital financial services, but most likely through the relationships of the owner and less likely to be uniquely associated with the firm. Then up to the medium-sized firm, which would be 20 and above. We can put the cap at 100, although it doesn't terribly matter for our purposes because we're not going to be looking at firms of that size. But medium firms in our definition are the ones that are really large enough to have professionalized, in this sense that they have hired a professional manager whose job it is to manage other people. They're more likely to be formal, to have access to formal financial tools and services, but that would also depend on the country context. But specifically, now that I've sort of laid out these three groups and our definitions that we're using, we're most interested in looking at the group that is the small firms, and for a bunch of reasons. So I'll just lay out three reasons that we're interested in this small firm group. So for one, I think if we know anything, we know something about the micro enterprises. One of the striking findings from the literature, I think, can be summarized as the myth of the micro entrepreneur. So from the 1970s on, the modern microfinance movement has really been focused on providing poor households with loans to build micro enterprises, grow those micro enterprises, and lift people out of poverty. And along the road to the many successes that the modern microfinance did achieve in expanding access to credit and expanding access to savings products, there were some bumps. So, rigorous evaluations of microfinance found less impact than we expected in terms of income and consumption and investment. And on average, as surveys observe, and micro enterprises don't tend to grow and do not tend to hire workers outside of the owner. So they don't hire additional workers. And one way to understand these findings is that maybe these poor households are not frustrated entrepreneurs, but they are frustrated employees. And so intrinsically not growth oriented, in the sense that they would prefer, perhaps, if they're available, to have a salaried, steady job, but owning the micro enterprise is the best way to make ends meet at that time. So if this were true, this might explain why on average these firms are not growing. And if we accept these findings and this sort of explanation for these findings, then what we want to do is help those firms that do grow, of that group, grow more and bring on additional workers and become more productive and pay higher wages. Which really brings us into this small firm category. So the second reason is that we find that small firms are really in this interesting sort of inflection point, or perhaps better said, entry point for formal labor. So when the poor households that we're discussing are able to get jobs, they're probably, statistically speaking at least, not likely to be within large professionalized firms, but more likely to be within this tier of firms, because if only because they're absolutely the most numerous. Looking at data from Nigeria and Indonesia, more than 99% of all firms have less than 10 employees. So most firms are small firms. And the third reason, and then I'll pause and let more people talk. We think small firms are interesting from a growth perspective. So nominally, perhaps small firms are growth oriented because they may have been growing already from the micro to the small. We don't know this for sure. There's so much that we have to learn about these firms, but we are curious and we are hopeful, about this sort of potential role in creating good jobs and livable wages. But within that sort of hope and that assumption, there are a lot of untested assumptions. So we don't actually know how many of these firms there are. We don't know how much they earn. We don't know what kind of wages they pay. And we don't know what, say, the threshold would be for them to hire another worker or for them to pay higher wages. So the other thing is that the empirical literature does tell us about small firms, and we find that they also don't grow on average. They also are not profitable on average. And so that tells us that we really need to test the assumptions that we have about small firms. And that's what we want to do in this project.
And so to your point too, specifically, Roberta, in some sense, I would say, yes, we're interested in, are these ESG factors, how do they play out? But starting from a position that we really don't know even what the factors are and what they would look like in a small firm. One of the things we're really interested in is this, how are woman-led firms different from male-led firms? Are their practices different? Are their ways of hiring and managing employees different? Is their access to capital different? How much of the, we know that some of these things are different. What direction is that coming from? Is it because the women have limited access to capital, so that puts them into industries where they don't need access to capital? is it that there are other constraints that even if they had access to capital, they wouldn't necessarily want to deploy it in the same ways as male-led firms would, and sort of trying to separate those things out. Sam, you are, people can feel free to raise their hand. I think there is a digital raise your hand thing, but I am also going to start calling on people too.
All right. Yeah, I do have a question, and if maybe you were going to talk a bit about proposed methodology. So if so, maybe it covers a bit of that. But you said male-led and female-led firms, and of course, a lot of the richness of the answers you're going to get is who are the diarists, and so who within an MSME are you going to follow? Because presumably you're going to get different results from a female-led, MD head versus a comparatively junior male staff member. So what's the plan?
Laura, do you want me to talk about that, or do you want to take that one?
Go ahead, take it on.
So as we're sort of enrolling people, we are asking who makes the decisions in the firm. And one of the things we want to be very sensitive to is it's not always clear how those questions are going to be answered that really sort of reveal who has control. So we are trying, our primary respondents are going to be the owners as defined by some questions of who gets to decide about money coming into and going out of the firm. But we're also going to be interviewing employees, not as thoroughly as we're interviewing the owners, to try and understand what role the firm plays in the household of the employee, how the employees come in, understanding the suppliers to the firms as well. But the primary respondent is going to be someone who says, I make the decisions about what we do on a daily basis. And because we're
customers as well.
And oh, yes, thank you, Laura. We're going to be talking to some customers as well. And because we're in that 1 to 10 employee range, so if there's a manager in the firm, then they're automatically excluded from the first voice, as opposed to sort of an owner manager. So we're looking for those firms that have owner managers and not individual managers separate from the owner. Others, please, Carla, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I will present myself. My name is Carla Palomares. I work in an NGO from Luxembourg, ADA, Appui Développement Autonome, and we support young entrepreneurs to have access to finance. We work. We divide our actions in based on the financing needs of the entrepreneurs. And if we have young entrepreneurs and this is first enterprise and they have a small financing, they will work with, we will work with microfinance institutions. And now we are testing a new kind of financing mechanism with incubators and accelerators in Central America and in Africa. My colleague Dominique, who is in charge of West Africa sector, is also on this meeting. And I think I think it's interesting to see that you focus on the small enterprises, because when we are looking for information about their their impact, we always have these huge numbers and huge studies where we hear about MSMEs, and we can't see the difference between where is the micro, the small, and the medium. And besides all the discussions about the definition of MSME, micro, small, and medium all over the different countries. So I think it's interesting to see that that you will focus on this population. I think we are part of the network ANDE, and they talk a lot of small growing businesses. It's more or less what your definition more or less cover. And I was wondering what you are going to just focus on the entrepreneurs and how they manage and how they their financing needs, but you will also see what are their technical assistance needs. That's a question because what we are looking for with our new project with the incubators and accelerators is to bring them technical assistance through the incubators during all the financing period. That means before the investment and after the investment. That is one of the specific characteristics of this mechanism. And during years, during the 3 or 5 years that the financing due. So I will, you will see also this kind of needs, technical and assistance, because it's not only, I think, the entrepreneurs is not only the desire to grow, is if they have the capacity to grow. Thank you.
Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way the project methodology is set up is well suited to understand this sort of holistic view of firm needs, behaviors, and constraints. So the quantitative data shows cash flows in and cash flows out, and we do have a particular focus on the financial lives, but kinds of questions that we're asking look at sort of the full range of firm owner experience and decision-making. Because I think we really need to look at that full picture to understand like the full universe of interventions that could be deployed. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things in the literature. Yes, Sam.
Does that mean that this will be very much a mixed methodology diary? There'll be presumably daily or weekly quantitative diary keeping right by the diarist, which I assume, like in most diaries projects I've worked on, then gets verified, checked, but also is there a more qualitative, open-ended? Are there going to be phone interviews periodically as well to get that richness of the stories that you were just talking about, Laura?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big part of the methodology as well. We're in the midst of designing our qualitative modules, so different sections on topics that we would go and have in-depth interviews, not as frequently as the quantitative surveys, but periodically we would go and ask questions, you know, that again, try to dig into the sort of why behind the cash flows, where the cash flows give a certain picture, and then we will flesh that out with qualitative. And then I think, you know, we look at the quantitative data as it comes in and the initial qualitative data and seeing the patterns there and what we expected to find or what we didn't expect to find, then prompts researchers to craft other kinds of qualitative questions that we ask in subsequent modules.
You know, one of the things that's very curious in the literature that we do have looking at these firms is that there has long been this mystery that business training programs don't seem to show much effect. And there's a recent meta-analysis by David McKenzie that sort of revisits that literature and sees that there's more effect than we thought. It's just that the sample sizes have been too small to detect the size of changes that business training can yield. And they're meaningful, they're not big, but there's this really, really curious thing is that the business training programs do often succeed in getting the business owners, you know, the technical capacity, Carla, as you were saying, to improve, but those improvements don't persist. So, you know, the firm will implement some of these changes in the year after they get the training, but over time they do it less and less. And 3 years later, they're not doing any of the things that they were trained to do, even though they were beneficial. And so yeah, there is this real puzzle of that, you know, from a purely economic theoretical standpoint, that just makes no sense whatsoever. Why would you stop doing something that helps you? And so we do we think diaries, that qualitative plus quantitative, is absolutely essential for us to start to answer a mystery like that. David, that I couldn't quite tell if that was a raised hand or just shifting.
No, I was not raising my hand, but yeah. So if I can contribute to the discussion, So I guess that one important point to understand environment where those firms are operating, because many of the constraints are not internal but external sometimes. So you have risk that you have to face, and maybe you do not have the tools to face the risk, and so to overcome the constraints that limit your growth, right, over time. So I guess that one of the issue is that you have a changing environment, especially in this time, right? So from one year to another one, you have the complete economic system where you are in that is changing. So you have government programs, you have new technologies or whatever, and maybe you simply lag behind because, I mean, you don't have the capacity to, right, to keep up with what's going on in the environment. So in my opinion, most of the time, that's the issue. So so you don't have the abilities, the capacities to adapt to a changing environment. Because if we think about the economic system 20 years ago or 30 years ago in developing countries, well, like more like a predictable economic system, right? You have ups and downs because of, I don't know, environmental, natural disasters or whatever. You have some shocks, right? Weather shocks or whatever. So what you do, you simply you accept that, right? And you tend to go back to your previous level. Now we are in an environment where everything is changing, a labor market, new technologies or whatever. And so, I mean, you have to keep up and understand how to keep up. So managerial skills are key in that, probably. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, Debbie, that's a sort of a great sort of way to, oh yes, Irene, please.
No, first comment on it. I have something else.
Okay. And I'm just gonna take a moment to say hello to Neve, who just popped in. One of the deep sadnesses of not being at e-MFP in person is I don't get to say hello to Neve this year. So hi, Neve. I was going to ask sort of a Polish kind of question. If people had to sort of rank the constraints in terms of a market external constraint, meaning, you know, the overall economies that these firms operate in, the markets are not well functioning, it's hard to acquire customers, it's hard to transact, all of those sorts of things. An internal constraint to the entrepreneur, meaning the entrepreneur doesn't necessarily have the skills, the experience, the technical capacity to take advantage of the opportunities, or an internal constraint to the firm doesn't have the finance or the access to the proper quality of supplies or those sorts of things to be able to operate. What would you say if you had to rank those three? External market, internal to the entrepreneur, or internal to the firm is the most important constraint for firms of this size? And Irene, I'm going to make you go first.
I think your question relates more to the small firms and less to the micro entrepreneurs. I believe it's then more triggered from an internal concern.
Roberta, what is your belief right now as to what's the most important?
I believe that internal constraints are also extremely important and relevant, mainly because sometimes it's really difficult for internally to organize and to get I don't know, like to manage when you are in a in a constrained environment, which is like a micro firm. So.
Dominique, so people move around as people come and go. I sort of lose track of people. Dominique, we haven't heard from you. What would you say is the most important constraint?
So just to get clear, is the entrepreneur the internal to SME and the external factors, right?
Right.
Yeah, I think somehow rank it as starting with the entrepreneur, because if I look at the whole environment, different countries and context and the climate, the wars, etc., you see that in those environments, people strive and find ways to navigate. Though the environment is hard, but you find entrepreneurs are doing something, and then it's, for me, it tends to say or to show the ability as a person that if you have that sense of business, of entrepreneurship, of innovation, then there is possibilities that you find ways to navigate. Though the whole environment, of course, is going to pin you down, but at least it shows the ability to do something. Mm-hmm. And which actually will also, I take the opportunity to sort of ask a question. Are you going to look at the, you mentioned the female and male SMEs led by gender, so whether by gender, but are you going to look at the young entrepreneurs versus older entrepreneurs? Because I mean, within ADA, we're very much interested to look at young entrepreneurs. I mean, of course, for instance, in Africa, where we'll be having in 2050, probably what, 1 billion young people, and then young people tends to have probably innovation, to understand the environment, to move around very quickly, and then if they fail, they tend to move to something else, without necessarily keeping the whole business. So it's a whole challenge. Even when you're supporting them, the support is, you might provide everything, but if they fail, it's not that they're going to start again in that particular sector. They'll start over in something else, probably, bringing the whole knowledge. And I come to your point where you say, like, you support SMEs, and then after a few years, they tend to change. The set of things that, the external environment will come in. Mm-hmm. And then probably the change in the, in the mindset, probably the changes outside the SMEs that you're not capturing. And then the SMEs is the one, getting the headache. And I might give an example. For instance, we're supporting young entrepreneurs in Senegal. And when they start having good businesses and, things are running, especially for women, these are young women, between 20 to 25 years, they get married, and all the capital they have accumulated all these years is going to be used for something else. So you might tend to think that the business is doing bad, but actually the capital that was inside is moving away, mm-hmm. And then things are starting, and it's all of a sudden you're starting over, and then you have other responsibilities, etc, etc. So are you going to look at those angles in your study?
So before I answer that, Dominique, we are, this is a relatively short amount of time. And so I want to ask a favor of each of you as we go through this. Today, we just launched smallfirmdiaries.org, the website for the project. Would love for you to give us some of your information so that we can follow up with you as the project goes on. But actually, what I really want to ask you to, there's a contact ability there to email us and tell us what questions you have, because we really very much are still at this stage of figuring out what are we going to ask and what are we looking for. And so, a quick answer to your question, Dominique, is we hadn't really thought about that young old sort of divide. And I think that's a really interesting question, and that we'll capture some of that, and we can now be looking for that because of your question. In terms of this ongoing thing of like what's happening with the capital flows, the reason we're doing diaries is because you have to be able to see that this is not that the business is doing badly, it's that the profits are being directed elsewhere. And you can't really assess the success of a business just on growth. You have to assess it in terms of what is it that the owner is actually trying to accomplish, and maybe the capital is being raised to do something else. If we're successful, we'll see both that this is a profitable firm and it's throwing off profits, and we'll see that the profits are leaving the firm rather than being invested, and we'll be able to ask the entrepreneur why. Is it because you, female firm owner, want that? Or is it because there are other constraints in your household that are capturing those? And maybe there's something that we can deliver policy and program wise to allow you better control over those profits. We don't want to force them to invest in a business that they don't want to invest in, but we also don't want to ignore that maybe they can't invest in the business because of other constraints that they face. Irene, I want to come back to you. You did say you had some other thing that you wanted to raise, and I don't want to sort of ignore that.
Great, thanks. No worries. I wanted to touch base a little bit on what you were saying, that initiatives may phase out 3 years after because entrepreneurs are not keeping going on it, but also on a comment from Laura defining microfinance entrepreneurs. I think here you really have to differentiate between necessities who have to be forced to become entrepreneur and those who want to be entrepreneur, because only the second group will have the potential to, or also the interest to see what can be done on growth perspective, what can be done in terms of savings and creating more profits, and can I make cooperation or alliances with others who are not necessarily competing to me, but maybe I can purchase together in a larger size goods and getting it cheaper in this regards, particularly when it comes to restaurant or food service enterprises, because packaged only when you ask for 1,000 orders, you might get better prices. And I think this is also something relevant for crowdsourcing, not necessarily in a one-to-one area, but maybe of thinking in group gatherings and ideas. And one step which I think would be also nice to see in the service, to think on the accounting, because this is probably the first step for every entrepreneur to think to which extent do I want to do something with an external source? Can I use an accounting software like QuickBooks or any one similar to it? And those might keep going, because if you have this one established, you will not give it up again.
I think this relates to what Dominique was saying too. My overall theory about this is it's really, really hard to learn about yourself and what you're good at. And at the same time, it's really hard to learn what matters in running a business. And so, when you run into difficulties, it's hard to establish, is it because I'm not good at this? Or is it because of some mistakes that I made that I can correct? Or is it because of the external situation? And so people do sort of cycle through lots of different things. Sometimes they shut down the businesses and start a new business. Sometimes they adopt practices and then abandon them. Sometimes they do lots of different things. They shut down a business, take a job, come back to the business, try to keep both open. The business is reasonably successful, and instead of investing in what they're doing, they also start doing something else. So anecdotally, we see a lot of businesses that are food services businesses and also have a side in doing, in sewing or doing something else, which might make sense, but could just be part of this factor of it's just hard to understand what you should be doing and what's the best use of your time. And so, yeah, Sam.
Sorry, I didn't. Someone said there are no stupid ideas, which I think is not true, but here is one. I wonder if at enrollment, it might be possible to include a reduced version, a compressed version of either psychometric test or one of the standardized personality tests for extroversion, risk appetite, perception of risk, self-worth, these kind of things, and then look for correlations in sort of growth appetite,
Wait, did you
despondency.
say correlations? Sam.
Associations? Is that what you want from me?
No, I'm joking about the whole correlation.
They might be more than correlations. They might be causative, but let's just call them relationships. But I wonder if that could. I mean, enrollment is, in my limited experience of diaries, enrollment's a challenge, and you get selection biases if you make it too onerous. But I wonder if there's a way to incorporate that in and really look, what kind of person is someone who presses on in the face of struggle, and what kind of person does something because there were no jobs available, so selling mobile charge cards was all they could do, and then will move on the moment they can. Anyway, that was all.
Yes, David.
Yes. No, I think what Sam is saying is very relevant. So going back to the discussion between internal and external factors, I think that for small micro enterprise, right? So I don't remember exactly how the story goes, but it's something like you have to accept what you cannot change, and you have to change what you can change. So the environment is taken for granted, right? So the idea is to understand what are the key factors, and some of them was mentioned by Sam, that allows me to thrive, right? As the environment changes. So what are the elements that, because I mean, you don't just have to consider, in my opinion, right? Because before I mentioned the fact that the environment is changing over time. So if you just do a cross-section over time without considering those changes over time, right? But you have an average picture of what are the key factors that drive to success. But if you cut, right, the analysis over time, you have a different situation, different risk, different challenges, and maybe in some periods, some skills are better than in other periods. So, so the idea to understand what is the best set of skills that allow me to, right, to stay alive over time. So like a set of tools that I need to be successful.
One of the things we are planning on attempting to do is to continue to follow some firms that stop during the course of the study to see what happens. You don't get ejected from the study if you decide to close down. We want to keep following that person. Like, what did they do next? Did they start another firm? Did they get a job? Did they just sit at home? What happens to their household? On that note, I'm going to hand things over to Laura to wrap us up. I'm on my way to another session that I have to be at, and I know that people are panicking, wondering if I'm going to show up. So thank you so much. Let me again encourage you, smallfirmdiaries.org. Let us know what other questions you have and what you want to know, because we really do want to know that so that we can answer the questions. We're not just, we're deeply curious, but we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're doing it for you. So we need to know what you need. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to Laura.
Thanks, Steve. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tim. Wrapping us up. I'm happy to give the last word to if there are other burning questions or thoughts you want to add. If not, as Tim just said, please do visit us at smallfirmdiaries.org. Get in touch through the team at smallfirmdiaries.org email address, or find me on LinkedIn or whatever. And we want to continue to hear your thoughts and your questions, and really appreciate your time in joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Laura.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck. Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.